Hey everybody, welcome back to my studio. I'm Aurora and today we have a little tutorial kind of sort of thing going on. I was asked by Positively Amina on Instagram, how different is gouache to watercolor? And I told her I would make a video explaining the difference between watercolor and gouache. So I came up with this little show card to show everybody the difference. Now, what I'm using, excuse me, is the Arteza watercolor set in the cakes. Let me see that. And also the Arteza gouache set that I received. And I've let these dry in a palette. So they're pretty, it's gonna be an even show, okay? Same company, both dried, not using anything out of a tube. So this is what we're gonna do. So first off, we're gonna do the watercolor side so that everybody can see. By the time you're done, you'll get to see the complete difference. So I'm not going to do any kind of pre-wetting of the surface or anything like that. And we're just gonna talk about the differences. So the reason why I put the square and the circle on both sides is to show blendability and layerability. So, and then the eyes, we're gonna paint the eyes so you can see the real difference. So let's see, we're going to do blendability here, which if you are a fan of watercolors and you know a lot about watercolor, you will know what I'm doing. So I'm just going to put down some watercolor. Rinse my brush off. And then I'm going to drag it down so that you have a gradient. And then we're going to choose another color. Let's choose this one. And I'm not one for remembering the names of things, so I just know it's blue. Rinse my brush off. I'm gonna show you how this is done with gouache as well, so. There we go. And it's blended. Not very well, but it's blended. All right, so that's how watercolor looks for blending. So layering, we're going to do a little bit something different here. I'm going to go ahead and just wet the inside of this circle. You're probably wondering why. I'm also going to put a link in the description box so you can download this little card and you can play around with it yourself. You can print it out and you can see for yourself. So let's use the yellow this time. And just drop this in here. Okay. Now we're gonna have to let this dry so we can show you how it'll layer. It was gonna be wet either way. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the same thing over here on the gouache side. And I shall show you using pretty much the same colors. We have a kind of a magenta color. we'll do the same thing. On this side. Bring it down, just like we did the watercolor. And then I'll go get some blue and work our way up. Not gonna be the same color blue, but it'll be close. It'll be close. I have noticed that gouache is just a tad bit more difficult to reconstitute or re-wet or whatever you want to call it. Once it's been dried in the pans, it takes a little more doing. To get it wet again. I'm gonna let that dry. Pretty much looks like the same thing. Okay, and then we'll wet this one just like we did the other one. So we can layer it. And pick up some yellow. It's almost exactly the same color, isn't it? Now you can see also where you can still pick up gouache or lift it when it's still wet, and you can still see the difference here. This one's blending out pretty well. Now this is, don't look at the blend. It's kind of sketchy, but that's because I'm not that great at it. But you can see the you know, how it's still blending. And when it dries, the difference between watercolor and gouache also is that watercolor always dries lighter, like always. Whereas gouache, some colors will dry lighter and other colors will actually dry darker. So you kind of have to swatch them. You really have to swatch them to find out which will do what. And that way you'll know that you have to water one down a little bit more to get the same tonal value as a watercolor, if that's what you're looking for. So you need to know those types of things, and swatching is always a good thing. I'm not a big swatcher, I know. I should swatch more, but it takes a lot of time. So, but it's worth it in the end. It really is. So I'm gonna go ahead and wet this eyeball here so we can see the color difference when you're gonna shade, and then you have your darks. Oh, that's gouache. Not that one yet. Not that one yet. I'm gonna go back to watercolor. So let's take, and see, you can still reconstitute it even if it's dried in the pan, and gouache is the same exact way. You can still reconstitute it. Now acrylic wash is something completely different. It is not the same as regular gouache, but we're not talking about that here today. We're talking about just regular old gouache. Acrylic wash, once it's dried, you're done. You cannot reconstitute it. It will not re-wet, not on the paper, not in the pan. It has to be used out of the tube. Whereas regular gouache acts like watercolor, where you can re-wet it and it acts like watercolor. So we know that if I was to drop this in here, it's going to kind of bleed out into the part that's wet, which is cool. You can do that with watercolor. And when you're wanting to get that eyeball effect where you have the little lines, this really works. As you can see. Now, I want to get a darker color in here. Let's get some nice blue. So if you want that gradient, Watercolors is great for that. Now, gouache will do it as well if you water it down enough. But remember that gouache has a very matte finish. Watercolors can too, but it's so hard to describe. It's almost like it's just the paper. It's not sitting on top of the paper. Watercolor goes down into the paper where gouache almost sits on top of the paper. So it has that, not a chalky feel, but you can see where it's a matte finish. It really like sits on top of the paper. You don't see the tone, like the pattern of the paper coming through like you will with watercolor. Gouache has a very matte, clean, flat finish. So let's see, are you? Yes, you are. Okay, now here's the difference between watercolor and gouache. If you're going to try to layer a watercolor over a watercolor, because they are transparent and gouache is not, it's going to still show the yellow through a secondary color over top of it, whereas gouache will not. Gouache will show it's a color on top of a color. Watercolor is like stained glass window type of thing. So what color do we want to try? Here we go. If we use a purple over yellow, what is going to happen? It's going to turn brown, because yellow and purple make brown. And I was right. See, this is the difference. So you can see I used purple. I used purple out of the palette, but when you layer it over the yellow, that yellow shines through and it turns it brown. Now, if I use a purple over this yellow with the gouache, let's see, where's a good purple? I just have to use this. And a little bit of that. And that's a purple. But we want it to be thicker, because gouache is normally used very thick, whereas watercolor is not. Now this is still going to have a little bit of a brown tint to it, but it's still going to show more purple. There you go. You can see this is brown, and this has a much redder tint to it because it's layered on top. It didn't shine through. That's the difference between watercolor and gouache. Because even if I was to do this heavy, it would still turn out brown because they're so transparent. So let's look what our gouache eyeball will look like. Since we're here, use a little bit of the blue, just like we did on the other side. And some of the black for the iris, or the pupil rather. make that shadow just like we did on the other one. You can see how this is lighter down here, and we can still lift it. Let's see, let's get a little darker blue. And add that in here, just like we did with the other. And see how this turns out. After we let it sit and dry for a little bit. And then I'm going to show you something very interesting. As soon as these dry, let's put a little bit more black into that watercolor eye. It's kind of faded. Well, actually no, that's the same amount of black that we put on both. So I'll just add just a little bit more. Get a little bit more of a black. Okay. And this is still liftable. This is slowly drying over here and kind of melding together. It's not going great gangbusters like the watercolor did, but that's part of how gouache, acts. At least this gouache, the artisan gouache that I have. But what I find very interesting, and as soon as this dries, I will show you what I'm talking about. Is this dry? Yeah, that's dry. Is something that a lot of people use in a lot of their paintings, their watercolor paintings in particular, because white watercolor paint is extremely thin. A lot of people don't even use it. So they turn to white gouache to do highlights and those sorts of things, because it's so much more opaque. So you have it's almost like a jelly roll pen, but you can use it in other ways also, instead of just now. Tell me you can do that with watercolor, because you can't. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why gouache is, I mean, a lot of people love it. You can't do that with watercolor. You can put it over watercolor, but watercolor does not go over gouache. Let's just put it that way. So, this is why people will use their gouache over top of their watercolor. And that's not even close to being dry yet. Not even close. Now, watercolors also come in metallics as well, and so does gouache. So there's that similarity between the two. Just throw a little bit in there. Didn't I just say you can't put watercolor over gouache? Well, I lied. But you can, the white is because like I said, it's so much more opaque than a watercolor white, which most kits come, I think it was China white. It doesn't do this where you can make highlights. It is just not opaque enough. But the gouache you can. So here's our difference. Let's see if I can put that highlight in that watercolor eye yet. It's still so wet. There we go. Okay. So there you have it. The difference between watercolor and gouache. And you can keep layering gouache as well without it tearing up your paper, as long as you're not using a lot of water. It's same with watercolor, but gouache you can layer it one color over top the other, similar to this. So just to show you, I'm going to take some green, get it good and soupy. If you're using it out of the tube, you don't have to add as much. And that's another thing with gouache. If the more water you add, the more it's like watercolor. It doesn't come out as opaque the more water you add to it. So I'm going to put green down here. And see, that's 3 layers of gouache right there. And this is very much the difference when it comes to gouache. And I really do love painting with gouache. It's a very unique medium where you can just keep going and layering and layering and layering. And the colors mix very well together as well too, just like with your watercolors. So any color you want to get in a watercolor, you can get in a gouache. Just remember, you can layer them. You can still blend them and get that gradient out of them, but you can layer them, which is, who doesn't like that? And it's, like I said, very much like an acrylic that way. But, yeah. Do we have a green I can use? Yes, we do. Same color green. I'm gonna make this really thick and see if we can't do the same thing over here that we did right here. There's some good green. Now see, here's if it's thick. But you gotta realize too that if what you're painting on is still damp, it's gonna bleed into it. And that's okay. Because watch this. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna blend it out in the bottom. So we don't have that harsh line. And we'll do the same with the gouache. There we go. So the blending is basically the same. Can we lift this? Nope, because once it's down there, it's down there. That's kind of the nice thing about gouache. It's almost not as forgiving when it comes to that, but you can always paint over it. So here's our differences. We have the blendability, layerability, not so much. The blendability, layering, heck yeah, we got lots of layering going on over here. And the eyes almost look pretty much the same. So again, it's playing with your tools, figuring out what will do what. That's what makes art, is figuring out how your tools will work for you. And I really appreciate this question from Positively Amina. And if anybody ever has any questions about any kind of art supply, please don't hesitate to ask in the comment section below. I will do my best to research it, figure out what it is you need to know, and make a video. So until next time, make sure you go, if you want to download this, the link is in the box below. And yeah, so y'all have a great weekend, and I will see you in my next video. Love you bunches. Bye.